Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Shandora in the Bronx, Sharon in New Jersey, Karen in Northern California, Lucy in Minnesota, Joe in the Inland Empire, Renee in Indiana. I'm not sure what your name is. Fur Corners in North Carolina, Aoife in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Mickey in New Jersey, Moshe in Brooklyn, Elise in Virginia, Chaim in Florida, and Lester in Florida. Also, Carla in Brazil, Bill in Mid-Missouri. I think I said Renee in Indiana. Welcome, everybody. Got a double for you, pages 65 and 66 here in Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud. We're picking this up near the top of page 65a. Yesterday, we read the rather lengthy Mishna number 5 here in chapter 6. That is the final Mishna of chapter 6, and with God's help, we will complete chapter 6 today. So basically, we're talking about bird offerings, burnt offerings, and bird sin offerings. And yesterday, when we read this lengthy Mishnah, really what we saw is all the ways in which this bird burnt offering can be disqualified, including the ways that it is quite similar to animal offerings that become pigul if at the time that the offering is slaughtered or its blood is presented on the altar, the priest had in mind that he would consume the consumable portion of that offering beyond its time. That would render it disqualified immediately, even at the outset, and pigul, which means that if someone then did consume the consumable part, and he did it intentionally, that would be a kares-bearing penalty, death at the hands of the heavenly court. Nosar means that it wasn't an intention at the outset, but if he then left it beyond the amount of time during which the consumable part must be consumed, it becomes nosar, it's past its time, and then if he consumes it intentionally, it's not a kares-bearing penalty, but it does violate a prohibition. One who has in mind to eat it outside of its designated place would also disqualify it, but not render it pigul. And then we talked about various combinations of having the wrong kind of intent for the sake of the wrong kind of offering, to eat some of it beyond its time, some of it outside of its place, working with minimum measures to see if it's disqualified or not. This is the nature of the discussion of the disqualifications in this Mishnah. Now we begin the Gemara on that Mishnah near the top of page 65a. The sages taught a baraisa with regard to the verse pertaining to a bird burnt offering. Quote, and the priest shall bring it to the altar and pinch off its head and make it smoke on the altar. That's the basic commandment in Leviticus 1:15. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning when the verse states, and the priest shall bring it to the altar? Since the previous verse states that he shall bring his offering, this verse should have started with the phrase, and he shall pinch off its head. Seems redundant, since it is stated in the preceding verse, and if his offering to the Lord be a burnt offering of birds, then he shall bring his offering of doves or pigeons. Those are the kinds of birds we use in bird offerings. That was Leviticus 1:14. So one might have thought that one who donates a bird as an offering may not donate fewer than 2 birds. They have to come as a pair. Therefore, the verse states, and the priest shall bring it, indicating that one may bring even 1 bird to be sacrificed on the altar. They don't need to come as a pair. The Baraisa continues analyzing the verse. What is the meaning when the verse states that the priest shall bring it to the altar? It is to establish that only a priest may pinch its nape. Recall that when birds are killed for the purpose of bringing an offering, they are not shechted. They are not slaughtered with the kosher ritual slaughter that mammals are. Right? So if one brings a goat or a sheep or a bull, or their younger versions, a calf or a kid or a lamb, they need to be shechted, right, with a very sharp knife, that one smooth cut across the jugular and the windpipe. The blood pours out. That's the blood of the soul, and then that blood gets collected, conveyed to the altar, and sprinkled on the altar. And what we learned is that the collecting the blood, conveying the blood, sprinkling the blood, that has to be done by a priest. But slaughtering those mammals when they're brought as offerings does not have to be done by a priest. Now we're looking at when these kinds of offerings, a sin offering or a burnt offering, are brought in the form of a bird. And for the bird, it is not killed through shechting, even though you could. Right, when you eat a kosher chicken, that chicken was killed with a sharp knife, one smooth cut, etc., much as a sheep or a cow or a goat would be. But when we're talking about bird offerings, as we've been learning the last few days, they are killed through the process known as melika, which is pinching the nape of the neck of the bird. And the priest it's a very specific and difficult type of procedure where he uses his thumbnail to kill the bird. In the case of a sin offering, kill it till it bleeds, but not separate the head from the bird. In the case of a burnt offering, actually separate the head from the body of the bird. Now the question is, when we do melika, does that have to be done by a priest? You would think no, because in the case of animal offerings, which have additional stringencies that bird offerings do not, and yet the slaughtering can be done by a non-priest, then for a bird offering, which is more lenient in certain respects, you would think that the melika could be done by a non-priest. You might have thought that, but you'd be wrong. The melika must be done by a priest, and that's what we're looking at here. So what is the meaning when the verse states that the priest shall bring it to the altar? It is to establish that only a priest may pinch its nape, as one might have thought that even a non-priest may perform this procedure. Could this not be derived through logical inference? And if, with regard to a sheep brought as a burnt offering, with regard to which the verse established that it must be slaughtered in the north of the courtyard, and yet it did not establish that it must be slaughtered by a priest, then in the case of a bird burnt offering, with regard to which the verse did not require that its nape must be pinched in the north of the courtyard, is it not logical that the verse would also not establish that its nape must be pinched by a priest? You might have thought that. To counter this, the verse states that the priest shall bring it to the altar in order to establish that its nape must be pinched specifically by a priest. And the Baraisa continues, one might have thought that the priest should pinch its nape with a knife. And one could derive this through a logical inference. And if, with regard to slaughtering, with regard to which the verse did not establish that it must be performed by a priest, yet it did establish that it must be performed with an instrument, i.e. a knife, and we'll learn that on page 97, then in the case of pinching, which the verse established that it must be performed by a priest, is it not logical that the verse would also establish that the priest must perform that killing of the bird with an instrument, i.e. a sharp knife? You might have thought that. To counter this, the verse states, and the priest shall bring it near the altar and pinch off its head. In explanation, right, that's the word melika or malak. And the priest shall bring it near and pinch off its head. And now, in explanation of this verse, Rabbi Akiva said, could it enter your mind that a non-priest may approach the altar in order to sacrifice an offering? Remember that when mammals are slaughtered for an offering, okay, the slaughter is not done at the altar, and yet with a bird, they bring the animal to the altar, right? So that's a real difference. When the blood of a bird is presented on the altar, the priest is holding the bird itself and letting the blood come out of the bird onto the altar. Whereas with the mammals, they were slaughtered, not so close to the altar, and then the blood collected in a service vessel, and that was brought to the altar. So that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. Well, why would you think that a priest could do melika now that he also has to bring the bird to the altar? Could it enter your mind that a non-priest may approach the altar in order to sacrifice an offering? Since this is impossible, the verse does not need to state that the sacrificial rite is performed by a priest. Therefore, what is the meaning when the verse states the priest? It means that the pinching must be performed with the very body of the priest, his thumbnail, as opposed to a knife. The Baraisa continues to analyze the verse. One might have thought that the priest may pinch the bird's nape, whether above the red line of the altar or below it, right? That halfway, that line that demarks that upper half of the altar or the lower half of the altar. Some blood applications have to be above the red line, some have to be below. Wait a minute. So one might have thought that the priest may pinch the bird's nape, whether above the red line or below it. And to counter this, the verse states, and the priest shall bring it unto the altar and pinch off its head and make it smoke on the altar. So the verse juxtaposes the pinching to the burning of the bird on the altar to teach that just as the burning occurs at the top of the altar, so too the pinching occurs on the top part of the wall of the altar, meaning on the side of the altar but above the red line. And the Baraisa continues, the verse states that the priest shall pinch off its head, which must be performed at the nape of the bird. And do you say that the pinching occurs at the nape? Or is it only at the throat? It can be derived through logical inference. It is stated here with regard to a bird burnt offering and pinch off its head in Leviticus 1:15. And it is stated there with regard to a bird's sin offering and pinch off its head, opposite its nape, but shall not separate it in Leviticus 5:8. So, just as there, the head is pinched at the nape, so too here, when the bird is pinched in order to kill it, the pinching is done at the nape. If the law of a bird burnt offering is derived from that of a bird sin offering, well, perhaps it should also be derived that just as there, the priest pinches off the head, but does not separate it completely from the body. And so too here, with regard to a bird burnt offering, he pinches off the head, but does not separate it from the body. You might have thought that. To counter this, the verse states with regard to a bird burnt offering, and pinch off its head, and make it smoke on the altar. This indicates that, just as with regard to the burning of the bird burnt offering, the head is burned by itself and the body is burned by itself, so too with regard to the pinching, the head is by itself and the body is by itself, meaning the head has to be detached from the body. And the Baraisa continues, from where is it derived that the burning of the head is by itself and the body is burned by itself, as it is stated in Leviticus 1:17. And he shall rend it by its wings, and the priest shall make it smoke upon the altar. Since the burning of the body is stated in the verse, how do I realize the meaning of the earlier phrase, and make it smoke on the altar? So one must conclude that the verse is speaking about the burning of the head as a separate unit. The Baraisa continues to expound the verse stated with regard to bird burnt offerings. Right, again in Leviticus 1:15, and its blood shall be drained out on the wall of the altar. Now when the verse states, and its blood shall be drained out, it means that all of it must be drained out. And the continuation of the verse indicates that it must be drained out on the wall of the altar, and not on the wall of the ramp, nor on the wall of the sanctuary. And which wall of the altar is this? This is the upper wall, and that means above the red line. Or perhaps the verse is referring only to the lower wall, i.e. below the red line. And you could support this with a logical inference. And if with regard to an animal offering where the blood of its sin offering is applied above the red line and the blood of its burnt offering is applied below the red line, then with regard to a bird offering where the blood of its sin offering is sprinkled below the red line, is it not logical that the blood of its burnt offering would also be sprinkled below the red line? And to counter this, the verse states, and pinch off its head and make it smoke on the altar, and its blood shall be drained out. Could it enter your mind that after he has burned the bird, the priest goes back and drains out its blood? It's already been burned. So rather, the verse serves to tell you that just as the burning occurs at the top of the altar, so too the draining occurs at the top of the altar. How so? The priest would ascend the ramp and turn to the surrounding ledge. So we know it's the side ramp, right? The lower ramp, the ramp that does not that priests do not use to walk to the top of the altar where they place things on the fire, but rather the shorter ramp, right? The ramp that doesn't ascend so high. It only goes halfway up the outside of the altar to the ledge where the priests would walk around when they're applying the blood on the corners of the altar. That's this. We've been calling that the sub ramp. That's just my name for it, but it's the side ramp. Okay, the priest would ascend the ramp and turn to the surrounding ledge and arrive at the southeast corner. And he would pinch off the bird's head at its nape and separate it from its body. And he would then squeeze out its blood on the wall of the altar beside him. Nevertheless, if the priest performed the squeezing below his feet, i.e. below the surrounding ledge, even 1 cubit beneath the ledge, it would still be valid. And the Brisa concludes by citing a dissenting opinion. Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say the entire rite of a bird burnt offering is performed only at the top of the altar. And the Gemara asks, well, since the first Tana and Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov agree that the bird must be burned atop the altar and its blood must be squeezed on the top part of the wall of the altar, so what is the difference between them? And Abaye and Rava both say there is a difference between them with regard to whether one may form an arrangement of wood on the surrounding ledge and burn the bird there. Right? So we know that the sacrificial portions, right, burnt offerings in their entirety, or the parts of other offerings that are burned, where are they burned? On the altar pyre. Where is the pyre, right? This arrangement of wood with a big fire that is on the top of the altar, in the middle of the altar. We learn that there's also a secondary arrangement that's just used for making coals, and that is in the southwest corner of the altar. Now they're saying, well, how do we know that you don't also make a third arrangement on the ledge? Now, if the priest who is doing the melika, right, killing the bird by pinching its nape, and then squeezing out the blood onto the altar wall, and now it's a bird burnt offering, right? So the rest of it has to go on the fire, but he's on the ledge. So how's he going to get it up to the fire? The answer is he has to throw it up there. It's a crazy thing. Like, you know, when you think about all the incredibly dignified and ritualized things that these priests have to do, bringing offerings on behalf of the nation, on behalf of individuals, you know, you don't think about that. They also have that part of the procedure is throwing. They actually have to throw parts of these birds, but that does become part of it. What they're saying here is, well, maybe you don't throw it. Maybe you have another fire that's right there for you, since you're on the ledge, right? And the ledge is on the outside of the altar, and the altar is quite high. So rather than try to throw it onto this bonfire that's in the middle of the altar, let's build this third fire on the ledge, right? So that's what they're suggesting. They're not going to be allowed, but at least a minority opinion might be suggesting that. Let's see. Abaye and Rava both say there's a difference between them with regard to whether one may form an arrangement of wood on the ledge, the surrounding ledge, and burn the bird there. According to the first Tana, this is permitted when needed, and therefore it is valid if the priest squeezes out the blood on the wall up to a cubit below the surrounding ledge. According to Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, one may never burn the bird on the surrounding ledge, and therefore it is not valid if the priest squeezes out the blood below the surrounding ledge. New topic. The Mishna teaches that after the priest throws the bird's head onto the fire that is on the altar, he arrives at the body and removes the crop and feathers that are attached to it and the innards that emerge with them, and then tosses that onto the place of ashes. Now, one thing that we didn't talk about so much, but we mentioned it, that with regard to animal offerings, right, a sheep, a goat, a bull, if it was a burnt offering, there's some butchering that needs to be done, right? They don't just, kill the animal, drain its blood, and then just take that whole carcass and throw it on the altar. They would cut it up. And then if it was a bull, it would be a whole bunch of priests that would carry the various parts of that cut up bull and then place it onto the altar pyre. Here, what we're learning is when a bird offering is brought, even though it's quite small, I mean, these are pigeons or doves that fit in one hand, nevertheless, there is some, taking apart of the carcass of that bird, which is going to take place. Some of that bird is going to go up on the altar pyre, and some of it is not. The part that is going to be removed and then placed in the place of ashes, right? That's that place where in the morning, every morning, the priests who clean the altar, right? Clean the ashes from the day before, clean the soot out of the menorah, clean the soot, the used up burnt incense and coals from the inner altar in the sanctuary, the golden incense altar. All this cleaning that goes on in the morning, since these ashes and other detritus were involved in holy matters, it's disposed of in a very respectful way. So it's taken to this place of ashes, which is to the east of the bottom of the ramp, which is south of the altar. And so what we're learning here is there are certain parts of the bird offering, the crop and the feathers, we learned this yesterday too, which is disposed of in the place of ashes. Now, the sages taught in a baraisa with regard to the verse pertaining to a bird burnt offering, and he shall take away murato, this Hebrew word murato, with its feathers. That's Leviticus 1:16. Now, this word murato, what is it? It's referring to the crop. So the crop is part of the digestive system of a bird. It just swallows through its beak. There's a crop, there's a gizzard, which is kind of the upper stomach. Then there's, I think the crop is the upper stomach, the gizzard is the lower stomach, then it has intestines. And by the time you see bird poop, it's interesting that the bird doesn't have teeth, right? So if there's going to be grinding of the food in order for it to, go through the bird and sustain the bird as needed and then become what is disposed of when the bird poops, that food has to be ground up. That's why birds eat little bits of dirt and pebbles, tiny pebbles, which actually act as the teeth would in our mouths that grind the food, except it goes on in the gizzard, right? That lower stomach of the bird. At any rate, the crop is part of that digestive system, and when the priest dismembers the bird and removes part of it, right, so the crop and feathers come out, and that's what they're talking about now. So had the verse written only its crop, one might have thought that the priest may cut the skin with a knife and take the crop without any other part of the bird. Therefore, the verse states, with its feathers, benotsata, which teaches that he takes the feathers with it, i.e. he must remove the skin with the feathers still attached. So the Gemara presents another opinion. Abba Yosei ben Hanan says he takes the crop and he also takes the gizzard with it. A sage from the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught the word benotsata is a contraction of the words benotza shelah, meaning its feathers. So this teaches that the priest cuts it with a knife, creating an opening like a window opposite the crop. And this allows him to remove the crop with only the feathers and skin directly opposite it, and that is what he puts on the place of the ashes, as opposed to the rest of the bird, which goes onto the altar pyre. Now we're on 65b. The Mishna teaches that after removing the crop and the feathers and innards that emerged with it, the priest ripped the bird lengthwise and did not separate the two halves of the bird. In this regard, the sages taught in a baraisa that the verse states, and he shall rend, Leviticus 1:17, and the act of rending or tearing is performed only by hand, and so too the verse states with regard to Samson in the book of Judges, and he rent it as one would have rent a kid, and he had nothing in his hand, Judges 14:6. Now, the Mishnah teaches that if the priest did not remove the crop, or he changed any detail of the sacrificial rite, after he squeezed out the blood, the offering is valid. Right? And this is analogous to what we learned in the animal offerings, that it's the blood being applied to the altar that achieves the goal of the offering. If it was brought as a sin offering, as an atonement, if it was brought as a burnt offering, either to fulfill a vow or to offer, basically praise and thanks to the Lord, or if it was part of some group of offerings that needed to be brought, he has achieved his goal. The owner of the offerings has achieved the desired purpose when the blood of the offering is placed on the altar. So with a bird, right, since the blood is not collected in a vessel and then sprinkled, but sort of like it's put on the altar directly from the carcass of the bird, so that purpose is achieved, again, when the blood hits the altar. Then there are necessary steps that need to be done in order to finish the procedure. But if for some reason the priest is interrupted and those other steps are not done, the offering remains valid and the owner has achieved his purpose or her purpose. If the priest separated the head from the body of a bird sin offering, it is disqualified, because for bird sin offerings, he does melika but doesn't fully separate the head. Whereas for bird burnt offerings, he does melika and separates the head from the body. And the Gemara says that the Mishna is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, as it is taught in the Baraisa that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, said, I heard that one may separate the head from the body of a bird sin offering. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for the difference between them, i.e., what is the basis for this disagreement? Rav Chisda says the difference between them concerns the question of whether squeezing out the blood of a bird sin offering after its blood has been sprinkled is indispensable or not. Is this an indispensable rite? If it is indispensable, that means that if it was not done, the offering is disqualified. If it is not indispensable, that means that if that part of the procedure was omitted, the offering remains qualified. The first Tana, whose opinion is cited in the Mishnah, holds that squeezing out the blood of a bird sin offering is indispensable. And since squeezing out the blood is indispensable, the priest will have to squeeze out the blood after separating the head from the body, and he will have performed the rite of a bird burnt offering on a bird sin offering, and that would disqualify it. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, holds that squeezing out the blood of a bird sin offering is not indispensable. Consequently, if the priest would separate the bird's head from its body, he would refrain from squeezing out the blood, in which case the rite is dissimilar to that of a bird burnt offering, and the separation of the head is considered as though the priest is merely cutting flesh and the offering is valid. He didn't turn it into a bird burnt offering. He just didn't follow the blood presentation procedure properly, but it would remain qualified. Rava says there is an alternative explanation of this dispute. It is possible that all agree that squeezing the blood of a bird sin offering is indispensable, and there's a difference between them with regard to whether interrupting the pinching before severing the second siman, i.e. the gullet or windpipe, one of the organs that must be cut in the ritual slaughter of a bird burnt offering, disqualifies the offering. Right, so we're talking about here, they're calling them a siman, a sign, but what they're saying is when you're slaughtering an animal, or a bird for the purpose of eating it, but let's just talk about animal offerings where you have to slice the windpipe and the jugular. So if you sliced one and not the other, you didn't complete the slaughter. So the first Tana holds that interrupting the pinching before severing the second siman of a bird burnt offering does not disqualify the offering, and therefore if the priest separates the head of a bird sin offering from its body, even though he interrupted the pinching before severing the second siman, he has performed the rite of a bird burnt offering on a bird sin offering, and therefore he disqualified it. Right? If you perform the ritual of a bird burnt offering, when you meant to do a sin offering, you disqualify it, and vice versa. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, holds that interrupting the pinching of a bird burnt offering disqualifies the offering. Therefore, in the case of a bird sin offering, since the priest interrupted the pinching before severing the second siman, even if he separates the head from the body, he is merely cutting flesh, i.e. it is an insignificant act, because he didn't transform a burnt offering ritual into a sin offering ritual. He didn't transform a burnt offering ritual into a sin offering ritual. Right. No, he didn't transform a sin offering into a burnt offering. He was just merely cutting flesh after the fact. Therefore, it would not be disqualified. Abaye says there is a third explanation of the dispute between these Tanaim. It is possible that all agree that interrupting the pinching before severing the second siman would disqualify a bird burnt offering, and there's a difference between them with regard to whether cutting the majority of the flesh of the nape of a bird sin offering is indispensable or not. And the Gemara points out, and Rav and Abaye disagree with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. One says that the difference between the first Tana and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, concerns whether interrupting the pinching before severing the second siman of a bird burnt offering disqualifies the offering. And the other one says that the difference between them concerns whether cutting the majority of the flesh of the nape of a bird sin offering is indispensable or not. And the Gemara asks, since there is a dispute concerning whether cutting the majority of the flesh of the nape of a bird sin offering is indispensable or not, can it be deduced by inference that all agree that we require the priest to cut the majority of the flesh ab initio? And the Gemara responds, yes. And similarly, it was taught in a brisa. How does one pinch the nape of a bird sin offering? Using his thumbnail. And the priest cuts the spine and the nape without cutting through the majority of the flesh until he reaches either the gullet or the windpipe. Upon reaching the gullet or the windpipe, he cuts one siman entirely, or at least the majority of it, and he cuts the majority of the flesh with it. And in the case of a bird burnt offering, he cuts the two simanim, or the majority of the two simanim. And the Gemara relates that the rabbi said this dispute between the Amoraim concerning the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, before Rabbi Yirmiyah. And Rabbi Yirmiyah said about this, have they not heard that which Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim said? In the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat. In the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Shammua. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, used to say, I heard that one may completely separate the head of a bird sin offering from the body. And what is the meaning of the verse that states, but shall not separate it? It means that the priest does not have to separate it, but not that it is prohibited to do so. Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ashi, said, Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, if that is so, then with regard to a pit in the public domain where it is written, and if a man shall open a pit and does not cover it, one can claim that this verse also means that he does not have to cover it, that it is permitted to cover it, but is not obligated. The Gemara responds, because you're using the same syntax, and we know that if you dig a pit, you have to cover it. So if that is so, then how can you now use this kind of syntax, which sounds like it's prohibited, but you're saying, no, it's permitted, but not mandated. The Gemara responds, how can these cases be compared there with regard to a pit, since it is written in the following verse, the owner of the pit shall pay? It is evident that it is incumbent upon him to cover the pit. But here, since it is written with regard to a bird burnt offering, and the priest shall bring it to the altar, the term it indicates that the verse is referring only to a bird burnt offering, and the verse has thereby differentiated between a bird sin offering and a bird burnt offering. We're on page 66a now. Consequently, it is obvious that whereas the priest must completely separate the head of a bird burnt offering, this is not the law with regard to a sin offering. Why do I need the verse to state with regard to a bird sin offering, but shall not separate it in Leviticus 5:8? Conclude from this verse that it is not forbidden to separate the head of a bird sin offering from the body, but rather one does not have to separate it. It is not forbidden, but is also not obligated. The Mishnah teaches that if the priest squeezed out the blood of the head and did not squeeze out the blood of the body, it is disqualified. So when the priest is bringing this bird burnt offering, right, so he's going to have to go to the right place, the southeast corner, perform melika, killing the bird with his thumbnail. He has to separate the head of the bird from the body. He has to squeeze that little bird head so blood comes out onto the altar. Then he throws that onto the altar pyre. Now he has the body. He's going to have to remove the crop and the feathers from it and rend it. And then he has to squeeze blood out of the body onto the wall of the altar. And he has to do both. He has to squeeze blood from the head and from the body. And if he doesn't, then he hasn't done the blood presentation properly and it would disqualify the offering. If he squeezed out the blood of the body and he did not squeeze out the blood of the head, wait a minute. I'm going to go back. The Mishnah teaches that if the priest squeezed out the blood of the head and he did not squeeze out the blood of the body, disqualified. Okay? But now, says the Gemara, if he squeezed out the blood of the body and he did not squeeze out the blood of the head, the offering is valid. So it seems like the blood of the body is the really important part, but he doesn't do that until he has done the blood of the head. But if he somehow skipped the blood of the head and did do the blood of the body, it's still valid. The sages taught in a Baraisa in reference to a bird burnt offering. The verse states, seemingly unnecessarily, it is a burnt offering in Leviticus 1:17. Why? We already know that. So why is it added? This teaches that even though the priest squeezed out the blood of the body and he did not squeeze out the blood of the head, it is valid. One might have thought that if the priest squeezed out the blood of the head and did not squeeze out the blood of the body, it would still be valid. Therefore, the verse states it is. And the Gemara asks, what is the biblical derivation for the opinion that the offering is valid if the priest squeezed out only the blood of the body but not of the head? And Ravina said there is no conclusive proof from the language of the verse itself, but it stands to reason that this is the case, as most of the blood is found in the body, not the head. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah 5, the final Mishnah of chapter 6, and we conclude chapter 6. And we conclude this book, not Tractate Zevachim, but Tractate Zevachim is a somewhat lengthy tractate with about 110, 120 pages. And so the Koren publication of Talmud Bavli split Zevachim into 2 volumes. And now we open volume 2 of Tractate Zevachim. That's just the way it's published in the Koren. In the Art Scroll, there are some tractates that are even divided into 3 or 4 volumes, right? That's why there's just more books, more actual books in the Art Scroll than in the Koren. Okay, we continue on page 66a. Now opening chapter 7, and here is Mishnah number 1 of chapter 7, and it's really continuing the same discussion. If the priest sacrificed a bird sin offering in its designated place below the red line, and he sacrificed it according to the procedure of a sin offering with pinching, i.e. cutting the nape with a fingernail and sprinkling, and he sacrificed it for the sake of a sin offering, right? He sacrificed it for what he was intending to do. He did it correctly. Then the offering is fit, right? So these are all the steps that are necessary. He has to sacrifice a bird sin offering in the right place, which is below the red line. And he has to do the whole procedure correctly, the procedure of a bird sin offering. And he had in mind that he was doing a bird sin offering. Then it is fit. This is the manner in which a priest is to sacrifice a sin offering ab initio. Now let's look about if he made mistakes. If the priest sacrificed the bird sin offering below the red line, in the middle of the altar, and according to the procedure of a sin offering, but he sacrificed it for the sake of a burnt offering. Now he had in mind the wrong kind of offering. Or if he sacrificed it according to the procedure of a burnt offering, even if he sacrificed it for the sake of a sin offering, or if he sacrificed it according to the procedure of a burnt offering for the sake of a burnt offering, in all these cases the sin offering is disqualified. If one sacrificed a bird sin offering above the red line, according to the procedure of any of the offerings, it is disqualified because it is not in its designated place, right? Bird sin offering below the red line. Bird burnt offering above the red line. That's the opposite of animal offerings. A bird burnt offering that one sacrificed in its designated place, meaning above the red line, according to the procedure of a burnt offering and for the sake of a burnt offering. Okay, he did it right. It is fit. This is the manner in which a priest is to sacrifice a burnt offering ab initio. Now, the errors he might have made. If he sacrificed a bird burnt offering above the red line, according to the procedure of a burnt offering, but for the sake of a sin offering, right? He had in mind that he thought he was doing a sin offering, then the offering is fit, but it did not satisfy the obligation of its owner. If the priest sacrificed a bird burnt offering according to the procedure of a sin offering for the sake of a burnt offering, or according to the procedure of a sin offering for the sake of a sin offering, the offering is disqualified. If he sacrificed it below the red line, according to the procedure of any of the offerings, it is disqualified because he did not sacrifice it in its designated place, because it was a bird burnt offering. That's Mishnah 1 of chapter 7. Now we're on page 66b. We begin the Gemara of that Mishnah. According to the Mishnah, a bird sin offering that one sacrificed according to the procedure of a burnt offering is disqualified. And the Gemara asks, with regard to what right did the priest change the procedure? If we say that he changed the pinching by severing the head completely, because that's the procedure for a burnt offering, and he intended to do a sin offering, shall we say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, who says, I heard that the priest would sever the head completely, even in the sacrifice of a bird sin offering? Right, we just saw that at the end of chapter 6. And the Gemara responds, and what is wrong with this conclusion? Have we not already explained that the Mishnah in the previous chapter that we just read a moment ago, with regard to pinching, is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon? But the Gemara offers a new and different explanation. No, the Mishnah is referring to a case where the priest changed the procedure in the rite of sprinkling by squeezing out all the blood at once, as one would do with a burnt offering, rather than first sprinkling the blood on the altar as is proper for a sin offering. Under such circumstances, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, would also agree that the offering is disqualified. And this too stands to reason that the Mishnah is referring to a change in the sprinkling. This can be inferred from the fact that the Mishnah teaches in the latter clause that if one sacrificed a bird sin offering above the red line, according to the procedure of any of the offerings, it is disqualified. And this applies even if he sacrificed it according to the procedure of a sin offering and for the sake of a sin offering. He knew he was doing a sin offering. He was doing it for the sake of a sin offering. He did it the way that a sin offering is meant to be done, but he did it in the wrong place, above the red line, disqualified. So with regard to what right did the priest change the location of the procedure? If we say that he changed the pinching, performing it above the red line, didn't the master already say with regard to a bird sin offering that pinching is valid anywhere on the altar? It should be done above, but doesn't matter if you do it below. So rather, is it not that he changed the location of the sprinkling? And since the ruling of the latter clause is stated with regard to sprinkling, by inference, the ruling of the first clause is also stated with regard to sprinkling. And now the Gemara responds to this proof and says, are the cases comparable? This case is as it is, and that case is as it is. Even if the ruling of the latter clause is stated with regard to a change in location of the sprinkling, the ruling of the first clause may still be stated with regard to a change in the procedure of the pinching, in which case the Mishnah would not be in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. According to the Mishnah, a bird burnt offering that one sacrificed according to the procedure of a sin offering is disqualified. And the Gemara asks, with regard to what right did the priest change the procedure from sin offering to burnt offering? From burnt offering to sin offering. If we say that he changed the pinching of the bird's nape by leaving the head partially attached, as is proper for a sin offering, then from the fact that in the latter clause, i.e. the first clause of the next Mishnah, that we're going to come to tomorrow on page 66b, Mishnah 2, where it teaches, all of the offerings enumerated above do not render one who swallows their meat ritually impure when it is in the throat, and one who benefits from them is liable for misuse of consecrated property. So then by inference, we must say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. As if it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, doesn't he say later on in that Mishnah concerning a burnt offering whose nape was pinched according to the procedure of a sin offering, one who derives benefit from it is not liable for misusing consecrated property. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. We're going to talk more about this tomorrow, but just to introduce the concept. So we've been talking about bringing bird offerings, either sin offerings or burnt offerings, and how the bird is killed with melika, and that in the burnt offering, the head is fully severed from the body, and in the sin offering, it's partially separated from the body. And that in none of these cases is the bird shechted. It's not cut with a knife, which is necessary for eating, right? When you're going to eat a kosher animal, then when you shecht it, you have killed it in a kosher manner and rendered it available for eating. You can eat it. Since it's an animal that was slaughtered in a kosher manner and is a kosher animal and now is available for eating, that means it is not a nevela. A nevela is an unslaughtered carcass. That's any animal that died by any means other than shechting, right? And therefore, since it's an animal carcass, it is a source of tuma, of ritual impurity. Whereas if it's a kosher animal that was shechted properly, it is not a source of tuma, and we can eat it. What they're going to talk about is, okay, so does a bird that is not shechted, but rather is killed by melika, is it considered a nevela? Is it a carcass that can impart impurity? Of course not. It is an offering, a sacred animal that's brought on the altar. It's not going to impart impurity. But if the priest commits an error, and now it is no longer fit as a sacrificial offering, does it revert to being an animal that died not by means of shechting, right? So there's an exception for birds killed by melika that they do not become a nevela that imparts impurity. But if you get it wrong, then maybe it reverts to just being an animal that is a treifa, an animal that was killed that becomes a nevela, an animal that was, it's a kosher animal, but it was not killed through slaughter. It did not become a fit offering, so maybe it does impart impurity. That's the question we just hinted at now, and we'll examine more tomorrow. And also that sin offerings, right? A sin offering, parts of it are eaten by priests, whether it's an animal or a bird. And so that becomes available for eating after its sacrificial procedures have been carried out properly. Once it becomes available for eating by a priest, it is not subject to me'ila, misuse of consecrated property. But since it was something that was consecrated, and then if it was slaughtered improperly, it will not become available to be fit for eating by the priests. Therefore, since it doesn't become available for eating, it will remain subject to me'ila if somebody somehow makes use of that dead animal for personal benefit. Then he would have violated the prohibition on personal benefit from consecrated property, which is known as me'ila. Okay. So rather, the Mishna must be referring to a change in the procedure of squeezing out the blood. Instead of squeezing out the blood, the priest sprinkled it on the wall of the altar as if it were a sin offering. And in this case, even Rabbi Yehoshua would concede that one is liable for me'ila, for misusing it. But say that the last clause of the subsequent Mishnah, in the case of a bird burnt offering that one sacrificed below the red line according to the procedure of a sin offering, and for the sake of a sin offering, Rabbi Eliezer says one who benefits from it is liable for me'ila, as it remains a burnt offering. And Rabbi Yehoshua says one who benefits from it is not liable for me'ila, as the bird assumes the status of a sin offering, which once it becomes edible by priests is not subject to me'ila. Here, with regard to what right did the priest change the procedure and perform it as if it were a sin offering, and if we say that he changed the squeezing, this poses a difficulty, as it is reasonable to say that Rabbi Yehoshua says that one is not liable for me'ila when the priest changed the pinching, as pinching a burnt offering for a bird as pinching a burnt offering for a bird as though it were a sin offering changes its status. But does he say that this is the case where it was pinched properly and the priest changed the squeezing procedure alone? It is unreasonable to suggest that the offering changes its status at this later stage. So rather, this final clause must be referring to a change with regard to the pinching, But can it be that the first clause concerning a sin offering sacrificed as a burnt offering and the last clause concerning the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua are both referring to a change with regard to the pinching, but the middle clause concerning a burnt offering sacrificed as a sin offering is referring to a change with regard to the squeezing, right? When you say that it was a burnt offering that came to be brought as a sin offering, in what way did it become a sin offering? Was it the pinching, or was it the squeezing, or the sprinkling? So are we going to say that the first and last clause are talking about one type of change, and the middle clause is talking about a different kind of change? And the Gemara answers, yes, indeed. The first clause and the last clause are referring to a change with regard to the pinching, and the middle clause is referring to a change with regard to the squeezing. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 7. And God willing, we'll pick it up tomorrow with Mishnah number 2 of chapter 7. Let me take some questions or comments if there are any. I need to reload this document and catch my breath. Says Sharon, not to make light of this whole thing, of this whole learning, but why would a priest begin a sacrifice with the expressed intention of eating the meat at the improper time? Seems so contrary to what I imagine a priest would do. I 100% agree with you. So what we're really talking about is pigul. And the question is, why would a priest ever do that? Like, it's weird. Like, why would he even have in mind that he's going to be eating the sacrificial meat later, and not only later, but tomorrow when it's not permitted? Why would he have such an intention in mind? And I think the answer is like he wouldn't. Like it makes no sense, right? Knowing that it's a problem, he would never do that. But why do we know it's a problem? Because the Torah says the condition of pigul, of having this in mind from the outset, is specified in the Torah. So that's why we have to discuss it. And then the question is, why does the Torah mention such a thing? Now, it almost seems like the Torah, it's like giving you a softball. You know what I mean? Like this is an easy commandment not to get wrong, right? And yet, because it's there, it means that the priest has to make sure he doesn't get it wrong. Maybe it's an easy one to fulfill, but it requires some extra mindfulness anyway. Whereas a lot of, especially tomorrow, you'll see when we get to tomorrow's daf, they're talking about, well, there were 2 pairs of birds, and one was supposed to be sin offering, and one was supposed to be burnt offering, and they got confused. And what are we going to do, to make sure that the person fulfills his obligation? Is he going to have to bring an additional 2 pairs or 3 pairs or 4 pairs? And it starts to get completely disjoint and disjunct from the idea of, slaughtering birds and bringing offerings to achieve atonement. And it really becomes a logic puzzle. Like just really, how do we cover all the cases to make sure that somebody who intended to bring an offering has brought it? And it almost seems like, but the Torah, set up these conditions, leaving out information that you would need to know in order to fulfill these conditions and obligations. Why? Because from the outset, God intended, and clearly intended, by leaving these gaps, for us to have to come in, study, learn from our sages, and figure out how to fill these gaps. And the fact that there's a gap only with respect to an error or a situation that would never really happen in the real world, but could be imagined, right? The gap is only with respect to something that is imaginable, even though it's so impractical, nevertheless requires that we dig in and follow our sages, and study, well, okay, so in that situation, which can be imagined, even though it would never happen in the real world, where there's a gap in the law, how would we fill that gap? And it requires study, right? It requires labor. It requires going in and asking, because at the end of the day, even though all this stuff is so complicated and so seemingly impractical, especially when we're living 2 millennia after the destruction of the Second Temple, none of these laws have been fulfilled in 2,000 years. And may never be fulfilled again, even when Mashiach comes and the third temple goes up. It's possible that animal offerings won't be part of it. Nevertheless, we go in and study. Why? Because in all these questions, in order to answer them, we have to ask, what is God's will? What does God want from us? What is God commanding us to do? And the more time we spend asking that question, even in totally impractical matters, the smarter and more refined and more attuned to God's will we will be in matters that are practical and do matter and come up every day in our lives and aren't covered in the Torah specifically, but that we have to make decisions. Are we going to pick up that money? Are we going to tip, the waiter or the Uber driver, 15% or 18% or 20%? It used to be like, in a restaurant, you gave 15%, you're a generous person. Now that's not even an option. On the check, it says 18, 20, or 22%. Some places say 20, 22, or 25%. Is that correct? Is that good? Is that just? Do waiters need more money and therefore we have to tip more? Is society changing? Should we change with it? These are interesting questions, and there are whole halakhic discussions about them. But for us to understand, where to go with these kinds of questions, we have to spend time attuning our analytical mind. One more late-breaking question. What did they do with excess meat that was left over, since only the priests themselves could eat this? Did they have to burn it? Yes, that was it. Once it's beyond its time, it needed to be burned, not eaten. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific.